The voice from cabin 17. The worst mistake of my life wasn't going into the forest. It was answering the voice that sounded exactly like my brother. My name is Ryan, and this happened 4 years ago when I was 31. I've never told the full story publicly because even now, writing it down makes my hands shake. Back then, I worked as a freelance photographer. Most of my assignments involved traveling across remote parts of the United States photographing landscapes for magazines and tourism websites. One autumn, I received a contract to photograph an old mountain region in northern Montana. The area was beautiful but incredibly isolated. The nearest town was almost an hour away. No cell service, no tourists, no traffic, nothing, just endless forest. The company rented me a small wooden cabin deep in the mountains for 5 days. The cabin was part of an abandoned resort built during the 1970s. Most of the buildings had been demolished years ago. Only 3 cabins remained standing: Cabin 15, Cabin 16, and mine, Cabin 18. Oddly enough, there was no Cabin 17. At least, not anymore. The manager who handed me the keys casually mentioned that Cabin 17 had burned down decades ago. Then he laughed and said, "Locals still talk about that place." When I asked what he meant, he simply shrugged. Mountain stories. I didn't think much about it. People always had weird stories about old places. The drive to the cabin took nearly 2 hours along dirt roads. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting behind the mountains. The forest looked endless. Dark pine trees stretched in every direction. The silence was unsettling, not peaceful, not relaxing, just wrong. The kind of silence that makes you constantly look over your shoulder. Still, the cabin itself looked decent. Small living room, kitchen, bathroom, 1 bedroom. Everything seemed normal. That night I made dinner, watched a movie on my laptop, and went to bed around 11 p.m. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I woke up. No reason, no sound, no nightmare, just instantly awake. I lay there staring into the darkness. Then I heard it. A voice, far outside. A man's voice. Soft, barely audible. "Ryan." I froze. At first I thought I imagined it. Then it came again. "Ryan." The voice sounded familiar. Very familiar. My stomach dropped. It sounded exactly like my younger brother, Mark. The problem was that Mark lived nearly 2,000 miles away in Texas. There was absolutely no reason he would be here. Yet the voice was identical. Every detail, every inflection, everything. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the window. Outside was complete darkness. Nothing moved. No lights, no vehicles, no people. The voice didn't return. Eventually I convinced myself it was a dream and went back to sleep. The next morning everything felt normal. I spent the entire day hiking and taking photographs. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, cool air, beautiful scenery. By evening I had almost forgotten about the voice. Until sunset. I was editing photos inside when someone knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I looked through the window. Nobody. The porch was empty. I opened the door. Nothing. No footprints. No person. No sound. Just the forest. I stepped outside and looked around. That's when I noticed something. About 50 yards away between the trees stood another cabin. A cabin I hadn't seen before. My heart skipped. It was partially hidden by thick vegetation. Old, weathered, abandoned. And above the front door hung a rusted metal number. 17. Cabin 17. I stared at it for several seconds. That made no sense. The manager had said it burned down, yet there it was, standing in the forest. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward it. The closer I got, the more uncomfortable I felt. The structure looked ancient. Windows broken, walls warped, roof sagging. The front door hung slightly open. Everything about it screamed danger. I stopped a few feet away. Then I noticed something strange. The ground surrounding the cabin was covered with fresh footprints. Dozens of them, all leading toward the building. None leading away. A cold chill traveled through my body. I backed away immediately and returned to my cabin. That night I locked every door and window. Around midnight I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They circled the cabin. Once, twice, 3 times. I sat on my bed holding a flashlight. The footsteps never approached the door. They just kept circling, like someone was inspecting the cabin. studying it. Hours passed. Eventually the sound stopped. At sunrise I finally fell asleep. The next afternoon I drove into town. The first thing I did was ask a waitress about cabin 17. The color drained from her face. She immediately stopped smiling. Then she quietly asked, "Who told you about that?" I explained I saw it in the forest. For several seconds she just stared at me. Finally she said something that made my blood run cold. "Nobody's seen cabin 17 in years." I laughed nervously. "I saw it yesterday." She shook her head. "No, you didn't." Then she walked away. I never got another explanation. That evening I seriously considered leaving, but part of me wanted answers, so I stayed. Big mistake. That night around 1 a.m. I heard the voice again. My brother's voice. Only this time it was closer. Much closer. "Ryan." Outside the bedroom window. I slowly turned my flashlight toward the glass. A figure stood outside. Tall. Motionless. Watching me. I couldn't see its face. Only its outline. The thing stood there for almost a minute. Then it slowly walked away into the darkness. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning I packed my belongings. I was done. I didn't care about photographs anymore. I just wanted to leave. As I loaded my truck, something caught my eye. A folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. My hands trembled as I opened it. Written in faded pencil were 4 words. "Come to cabin 17 tonight." No signature. No explanation. Nothing else. The last ranger tower. The radio started calling my name 3 days after the ranger died. The problem was, the dead ranger was the one speaking. "My name is Ethan Walker, and this happened during the summer of 2021 while I was working fire watch in a remote section of Idaho." If you've never heard of a fire lookout tower, imagine being trapped on top of a mountain for weeks. No neighbors, no traffic, no internet, just endless forest stretching for hundreds of miles. My job was simple: sit in the tower, watch for smoke, report fires. That was it. Most people couldn't handle the isolation. I loved it. At least I thought I did. The tower sat on top of Granite Peak, nearly 40 miles from the nearest town. The structure was old, very old, built sometime in the 1940s. A narrow staircase wrapped around the outside leading to a small room at the top. The cabin wasn't much bigger than a bedroom. 1 bed, 1 radio, 1 desk, 1 set of windows looking out in every direction. The nearest occupied lookout tower was over 20 miles away. Every morning, I checked in over the radio. Every evening, I checked out. The routine never changed. Until July 17th. That afternoon, I received a transmission from another lookout tower. The voice belonged to a ranger named David Mercer. At least that's what I thought. "Tower 7, this is Tower 4. Do you copy?" "Copy," I answered. There was a long pause. Then he spoke again. "Don't answer any calls after midnight." I frowned. "What?" More silence. Then static. The transmission ended. I tried calling back. Nothing. No response. I assumed he was joking around. Some of the older rangers liked messing with new employees. That evening, during my normal check-in, I mentioned the strange conversation. My supervisor became quiet. Very quiet. Finally he asked, "Who told you that?" "David Mercer." Another long pause. Then my supervisor sighed. "Ethan, David Mercer died 3 days ago." The blood drained from my face. I laughed nervously. "Not funny. I'm serious." My supervisor explained that David had fallen while hiking near his lookout tower. Search and rescue found his body at the bottom of a ravine. The funeral had happened 2 days earlier. For several seconds I couldn't speak, because I knew what I'd heard. The voice had sounded completely normal, calm, clear, alive. My supervisor eventually blamed it on radio interference. Someone else's transmission crossing frequencies. That explanation sounded reasonable enough, at least at the time. The sun set around 9 p.m. Darkness swallowed the mountains. The forest below became a black ocean stretching endlessly into the horizon. I watched a movie on my laptop and eventually went to sleep. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the radio crackled. Static exploded through the room. I immediately sat up. The radio wasn't supposed to receive transmissions at night. Nobody used it after hours unless there was an emergency. The static continued for nearly 20 seconds. Then a voice emerged. "Ethan." I froze. The voice sounded weak, broken, but familiar. Ethan. My stomach tightened. It was David. I was absolutely certain. The same voice I'd heard earlier. The same ranger who was supposedly dead. I slowly approached the radio. "Who's there?" The response came immediately. "Don't look outside." Every hair on my body stood up. "What?" The transmission crackled again. Then the voice whispered, "It's standing below your tower." The radio went silent. Completely silent. I stared at it for nearly a minute. Then I laughed. A nervous, terrified laugh. This had to be some kind of prank. It had to be. Still, I couldn't stop myself from walking toward the windows. The flashlight in my hand trembled. Outside was complete darkness. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Then I pointed the flashlight downward, and immediately wished I hadn't. Something stood at the base of the tower. A person. Or at least something shaped like a person. It wasn't moving. It wasn't climbing. It wasn't doing anything. Just standing there, looking up. The distance and darkness hid its face, but I could feel it staring directly at me. A wave of panic swept through my body. I backed away from the window. The figure never moved. Not once. I stayed awake the entire night. Every hour I checked. Every hour it was still there, motionless, watching. When sunrise finally arrived, the figure was gone. No footprints, no tracks, nothing. That morning I radioed my supervisor. He immediately arranged for another ranger to drive up and inspect the area. The ranger arrived around noon. Together we searched every inch around the tower. Nothing. No signs of another person. No evidence at all. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Until that evening, the ranger had already left. The sun was setting. I was making coffee when something caught my eye. Written in the dust on the inside of the window were 4 words. "I don't like visitors." The words hadn't been there before. I was absolutely sure, because I'd cleaned every window that morning. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. And then, the radio crackled again. A familiar voice whispered through the static. "Ethan." It was David, but this time he sounded terrified. "Run." The Last Ranger Tower, Part 2. The single word echoed through the tower. "Run." For several seconds I couldn't move. The radio hissed with static before going completely silent again. I stared at it, then at the words written across the dusty window. "I don't like visitors." My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it. The tower suddenly felt much smaller than before. The walls, the windows, the old wooden floor, everything felt wrong. I grabbed the radio. David, if this is some kind of joke, stop." Nothing, only static. Outside, darkness swallowed the forest. The last orange glow of sunset had vanished. Now there was only blackness stretching endlessly around the mountain. Then something moved, far below, near the tree line. I immediately turned off my lantern. The room fell dark. I crouched beside the window and watched. At first I thought it was a shadow. Then another appeared, and another. 3 figures, standing among the trees, perfectly still, watching the tower. A cold chill crawled down my spine. They were too far away to identify, too motionless to be normal. And then, slowly, one of them lifted an arm, not waving, pointing, directly at me. I stumbled backward. The radio suddenly exploded with static again. A loud screech filled the room. Then David's voice returned, panicked, desperate. "Ethan, they're coming up." The transmission cut out. At that exact moment I heard something below. A creak, then another. The staircase. Someone was climbing, slowly, one step at a time. Creak, creak, creak. The sound echoed through the night. The staircase wrapped around the outside of the tower, meaning whatever was climbing could reach me in less than a minute. I grabbed my flashlight and hunting knife. Not that a knife would help, but it felt better than nothing. The footsteps continued, steady, patient, never speeding up, never slowing down. I peeked through the nearest window. The figure climbing the stairs was wearing a ranger uniform. For one brief second relief washed over me. Maybe help had arrived. Maybe another ranger came to check on me. Then the figure stepped into the moonlight, and my relief vanished. The uniform was decades old, torn, rotting, covered in dirt. The face beneath the ranger hat looked pale and sunken. Its eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's. And despite being 30 feet below me, I immediately recognized him. David Mercer, the dead ranger. I staggered backward. No, impossible. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. Yet there he was, climbing toward the tower. one slow step at a time. The radio crackled. David's terrified voice screamed, "That isn't me." The transmission dissolved into static. The thing climbing stopped. Its head slowly turned upward, as if it had heard the radio too. Then it smiled. I don't know how else to describe it. The smile stretched impossibly wide across its face, far wider than a human mouth should. And then it began climbing faster. I bolted toward the door. The staircase was the only way down, and now something was using it. I was trapped. The footsteps thundered upward. The entire tower shook. The creature reached the landing outside. I heard its boots scrape against the wooden platform. Then silence. Complete silence. I held my breath. Seconds passed. Nothing happened. Then came a knock. 3 soft taps. Knock, knock, knock. Exactly like a normal person. The thing spoke. Its voice sounded identical to David's. "Ethan." Another knock. "Open the door." I remained frozen. The voice continued. "It's cold out here. Knock, 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 please." The thing sounded almost human. Almost. But there was something wrong underneath the words. Like several voices were speaking at once. Then another voice joined in. My mother's. "Ethan, open the door." I nearly dropped the knife. The thing outside laughed softly. Then my brother's voice emerged. Then my father's. Then dozens of others. All blending together. All asking to come inside. The tower suddenly shook. A violent impact struck the wall. Then another. The creature was trying to get in. Wood splintered. Glass cracked. I knew the old tower wouldn't hold forever. I grabbed my truck keys. My vehicle was parked at the bottom of the mountain road nearly half a mile away. If I could somehow get past the thing, maybe I could survive. The impacts became stronger. The windows rattled. The door frame groaned. Then the radio crackled one final time. David's voice whispered, "The old mine." What? The old mine shaft. Static. That's where it lives. The transmission faded. I remembered something. Earlier that week I'd seen an old map hanging inside a storage shed. There was an abandoned silver mine a few miles from the tower. One that had supposedly collapsed decades ago. Suddenly a horrifying thought entered my mind. What if David never fell into a ravine? What if something else happened? The door exploded inward. Wood fragments flew across the room. I didn't wait. I jumped through the opposite window. Glass shattered. The fall wasn't far, but it knocked the wind from my lungs. Pain shot through my shoulder. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Behind me came an inhuman scream. Not angry, excited. The forest blurred around me. Branches whipped my face. Roots snagged my boots. Yet I kept running. Something crashed through the trees behind me, following, hunting. I reached the old service trail leading toward the abandoned mine. The moonlight barely illuminated the path. Every few seconds I risked a glance backward. Each time I saw movement between the trees. Tall shadows keeping pace with me. Not one, several. The figures I'd seen earlier. By the time I reached the mine entrance I could barely breathe. The opening yawned in the mountainside like a giant black mouth. Rotting warning signs surrounded it. Keep out. Unstable area. Danger. I entered anyway. The darkness inside was absolute. My flashlight beam cut through dust and old wooden supports. The tunnel stretched deep underground. Behind me came footsteps. Multiple sets. Entering the mine. I moved deeper. The air grew colder. The walls narrowed. Then I found something unexpected. A room. An old operations chamber. Inside were rusted tools, broken equipment, and dozens of newspaper clippings pinned to the wall. I shined my flashlight across them. Missing person. Forest worker disappears. Hunter never returns. Ranger presumed dead. The article spanned nearly 70 years. My stomach turned. There were so many. Far too many. Then I noticed photographs. Old black and white pictures. Every missing person appeared in at least one photo. Standing near the mine, including David Mercer. And beneath the photographs someone had written a sentence. It wears their faces. My blood ran cold. A loud scream echoed through the tunnels. Much closer now. The creature had entered the mine. I backed away. Then I noticed another passage leading downward. Something compelled me to follow it. The tunnel descended hundreds of feet underground. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. Eventually I emerged into a massive cavern. My flashlight swept across the darkness, and I finally saw it, the source of everything. At the center of the cavern stood a thing unlike anything I'd ever imagined. It wasn't one creature. It looked like dozens of human bodies fused together. Arms, faces, legs, torso after torso tangled into a towering mass. Hundreds of eyes opened across its surface. Every face stared at me. Some looked terrified. Others looked frozen in silent screams. Then one face moved. David's. His mouth opened. Ethan. The voice sounded weak. Real. Not the imitation. The actual David. I couldn't believe it. His eyes filled with desperation. Please. The creature shifted. Hundreds of mouths opened simultaneously. A deafening roar shook the cavern. I finally understood. Whatever this thing was, it copied people, mimicked them, absorbed them, and somehow trapped part of them inside itself. The faces weren't decorations. They were victims. The thing lunged. The cavern shook. I ran. Behind me came a nightmare chorus of voices. My family, friends, strangers, all calling my name, trying to make me stop, trying to make me turn around. Then I remembered the explosives. Old mines always had explosives. I sprinted back toward the operations chamber. The creature followed. The ground trembled beneath its weight. Back in the chamber I found what I hoped for. A crate of ancient blasting charges. Most were ruined. One still appeared intact. I didn't have a better plan. I lit the fuse, then ran. The creature entered the chamber moments later. Hundreds of eyes fixed on me. Hundreds of mouths smiled. The fuse disappeared into darkness. For 1 second nothing happened. Then the mountain exploded. A thunderous blast ripped through the mine. The ceiling collapsed. Rock and debris crashed everywhere. The shockwave hurled me down the tunnel. Darkness swallowed everything. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was shining overhead. I was lying among shattered rocks near the collapsed entrance. Rescue workers surrounded me. Apparently hikers had heard the explosion and called emergency services. I spent 3 days in a hospital. Broken ribs, concussion, dislocated shoulder. But I survived. When authorities investigated the mine, they found nothing unusual. Just a collapsed tunnel. No creature. No bodies. No evidence. Exactly what I expected. No one believed my story. Eventually the incident was classified as an accident. The tower was permanently abandoned. Officially because of structural damage. Unofficially, because nobody wanted to work there anymore. Years passed. Life slowly returned to normal. Or at least I tried to convince myself it had. Then last winter something happened. I was cleaning old files on my laptop. Thousands of photographs from previous jobs. Most were landscapes. Forests, mountains, lakes, nothing unusual. Then I opened a folder from Granite Peak. The night I first saw the figure below the tower, I didn't remember taking any photos that evening. Yet there was one image, just one. The picture showed the tower illuminated by moonlight. At first everything looked normal, then I zoomed in, and nearly dropped the laptop. Standing beside the tower was a man, a ranger, watching the camera, watching me, David Mercer. But that's not what terrified me, because behind David stood something else, half hidden among the trees. A massive shape, covered with faces, hundreds of faces, and one of those faces looked exactly like me. The photograph was dated 3 days before I ever arrived at Granite Peak. I've checked the metadata 100 times. The date never changes. I have no explanation, and I don't want one anymore. Because every year around July 17th, at exactly 12:03 a.m., my radio turns on by itself. The same radio I took from the tower. The same radio that should no longer work. And every year I hear David's voice whisper the same thing. Not a warning, not a plea, just 4 words. Words that keep me awake for the rest of the night. It survived the collapse.